everybody. Hi. Well, let's talk, now that we have our basic time frame, again, I'll just whip through the basic time frame just so we can frame our Russian history, and then let's talk about a few fun things about some of the peoples that live in Russia and some of the interesting peoples, and there's so much diversity in Russia that often isn't covered. Okay, so basically let's start our time frame with the Slavs in Ukraine. So what century do we have there?
11.
So we'll start with around the 11th century, and then we have the Tatar invasion, and what is this time frame that we have before the Tsars? Basically 11th century to
15th century.
15th, 16th century. 16th century, we have the time of our first Tsar, which is Ivan the Terrible. And then we talked about a couple other Tsars. Peter the Great, which moved the capital forward from Moscow to St. Petersburg. The Slavs are from Kyiv, Ukraine, originally, and moved the capital forward. And then we have Catherine the Great, where great expansion occurred, pretty much all the way out. So the time frame for the Tsars, 16th century to
18th century.
20th, right? Because the revolution is 1917. Okay. So Soviet era is early 20th century, right around 1917 to 1991. And so we can see that the Soviet era, even though there was so much change there, was under 100 years. And then we have hundreds of years under the Tsars, and hundreds of years before that when the Slavs were living in Ukraine and moved to Moscow. Okay? So I just wanted to put the time frame into kind of a more usable format. Let's talk a little bit first about the reindeer people. Much of Russia is Inuit, and so much of Russia is freezing cold. We talked about the continentality that we had here, and the mountains are here. This cuts off the warm air from coming in. We've got frigid polar air that comes down from the Arctic. And so a lot of people are Inuit. We know Inuit people as Eskimo in the United States, and yet Inuit people live all around the Arctic Circle up here. And there are many, many tribes of Inuit people that are living in Russia, and some are known as the reindeer people, which are people that follow the reindeer following the pack ice. So what's really important is for it to freeze, the pack ice to be frozen, so that the reindeer people can follow the reindeer on the pack ice. And this is a nomadic people, and they use the reindeer for everything, for meat, to build their shelter, their clothing. They use the antlers and the bones. They use the intestines. They use every single part of the reindeer. And they use the reindeer, too, to travel with. So they follow the packs. They move right along with the packs. And the reason that the reindeer do move is because they have birthing places. They need to reach their birthing places at a certain time of the year, and they need pack ice to be able to travel to get to those birthing places. Why do they need to go there and have birth at the same time every year? Because the females have their young all at once. They have their young all at once to give them a chance to survive, because the polar bears will show up, the wolves will follow the pack, and once the predators glut on so many, frankly, so many births happening at one time, then the rest of the babies can live. so the reindeer people are tied to the reindeer are tied to the pack ice and to the freezing, the pattern of freezing, so global warming could really throw a wrench into the way that the predators live. The polar bears need the ice too to be able to walk along the ice, the seals need it. And so global warming is going to change the patterns for all of those. There's another legend, this is a fun legend. You've all heard of the Amazonian women. So where do you think they come from? South America? One might think that Amazonians would come from South America because that's where the Amazon is located. But with genetic tracing, it's been discovered that these were a fierce tribe of women warriors. Of course, there were males too, and males did a lot of different things. But what was very interesting is that the women were warriors on horseback, very fierce ones that were buried with their horses. They were buried with their bows and arrows. There were legends that they would even cut a breast off so they could pull their bow better. And where were these women from? They've located them in the steppes, that they were Mongol warriors. Now, why they've been called Amazonian? Nobody's quite sure of that, but these women were Asian. They were blonde-haired and blue-eyed. The women were blonde-haired and blue-eyed too. So even today in this area, you'll find blonde-haired, blue-eyed Asian young girls born and taking to horseback really easily. They ride horses very well. Both men and women, by the way, ride horses just like they were born on them. No hands, just like they're growing right out of the horse. And so it's very natural for these young girls that are born sometimes blonde-haired and blue-eyed. So that's the story of the fierce Amazonian women that actually come from Central Asia, what is now known as Mongolia. Okay. So those are a couple of fun facts and myths about Russian peoples. And again, just to reiterate that under the Tsars, a lot of ethnicities were pulled in at that time and today remain. Oh, there's one more myth, and it's myth that's also backed by some fact. There was a huge disturbance that came out of the air and came and plummeted from the sky and hit into Siberia. And this is an area where Inuit people live. And so there wasn't a lot of people there to tell the story. But there were trees flattened out for many miles from the site of impact. There's still stories of people that lived there. It was I believe it was in the 1900s. But there are reports, and of course there's the crater that still remains there. So there's been all kinds of speculation as to what caused that. It was something that exploded before it actually hit. So it was an interesting, was it a meteor, UFO?
Is that what they're talking about?
Weapons, maybe weapons, could be weapons testing. So many different speculations. So that's another interesting thing that's happened in Siberia. Okay, that's enough for today. Thank you. Bye.